Now let's begin today's session with the keynote address by Professor Nyoman Pujawan. Professor Nyoman Pujawan is a professor of supply chain engineering at the Department of Industrial Engineering, Sepuluh November Institute Technology, Indonesia. He received PhD in Management Science from Lancaster University, UK. He also holds Certified Supply Chain Professionals from APICS, USA. His papers have appeared in many high-profile international journals, including the European Journal of Operational Research, International Journal of Production Economics, International Journal of Production Research, and so on. He is currently the president of the Indonesia Supply Chain and Logistics Institute. He is the editor-in-chief of Operations and Supply Chain Management and in the editorial board of few other international journals. In the last few years, he is also teaching in few universities abroad, including Mahindo University, Mei Fah Luang University, and King Mangkut University of Technology, North Bangkok. He will be giving a talk on research in sustainable supply chain, achievement and aspiration. We are having a great opportunity to listen to the words by a great knowledgeable speaker, Professor Pujawan. Sir, I now request sir to deliver your talk.
Thank you very much, Ms. Patel. Let me share my slide first. Okay. Do you see my slide now?
No, sir. No, Professor.
Not
now it has come. Now it has come.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much. All right. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Shah, Dr. Rafi Gaur, and all committee members who are organizing this excellent conference on sustainable supply chain. And I would like to present some high-level thought on the research which have been done in this area, in the sustainable supply chain, what have been done, and what are the aspirations. I'm Nyoman Pujawan, as already mentioned by Ms. Patel. Currently, I'm Professor of Supply Chain Engineering and Dean of the School of Interdisciplinary Management and Technology in one major public university in Indonesia. Right, so in the next 30 minutes, I would like to highlight the major works that people have done, but I'm not attempting to review extensively all the works that have been done, but rather I would like to highlight few important and interesting contribution and then highlight some future research need in this area. Let me start with some early development on what we now refer to sustainable supply chain. I think at the beginning people were using multiple terms to address this issue. One was green supply chain management and the other one is a sustainable supply chain. If we look at some of the literature, there are few major differences in the definition of green supply chain and sustainable supply chain. While green supply chain is basically emphasizing on the environmental thinking, how to consider environmental issue in supply chain management, including when you are designing a product, sourcing materials, uh, manufacturing the product, and finally delivering those products to the end customer. So basically, we focus basically on the environmental issue. But sustainable supply chain is somehow much more than that, because we are not only dealing or concerning about the environmental issue, but it is actually trying to combine three major concerns in any development, including when we are talking about business, which are the economic, environmental, and social issue of what many people actually refer to this as triple bottom line. So in any business, traditionally people were very much attempting to maximize the economic merit, to improve profitability, to reduce costs. But later on, we all agree, I think, in addition to achieving better profitability, enterprises need to also consider the environmental impacts and also the social impact. So the consideration of the social aspect is what actually basically differentiates between green supply chain and sustainable supply chain. I think, as was mentioned by Dr. Rafi Gore, I think he correctly mentioned about what we need to focus on when we are doing about research in the area of supply chain management, as we now trying to reduce energy consumption, to reduce the emission to the environment, probably also to use less materials in producing product, and also to produce less waste to the landfill. So that's why if we are talking about the environmental issue, there are a lot of practices now we know, like recycle, reuse, remanufacturing. Some people are talking about using hybrid production between manufacturing and remanufacturing together, or between more traditional and more green production facilities. And then we are also very much exposed to what is called reverse logistic, and also designed for re-eggs, where we actually have different types of eggs here, including reuse, recycle, remanufacturing, and repair. And also there are a lot of things discussed about green procurement, lean practices, and recently we are also very much exposed to the term like circular economy. All of these practices and also all of the works done by the academics are actually trying to improve the supply chain in such a way that supply chain management contribute to the shareholder by improving profitability, reducing the cost, but at the same time we are also concerning the environment. And also, as the definition of the sustainable supply chain, as I mentioned before, we also need still to consider more on the social aspect in the supply chain management. So when we are talking about sustainability, whether it is only focusing on the environment, or actually we are extending our view on the environment as well as the social system, we are not only talking about end of life of the product, but we are talking through the whole life cycle of the product, starting from the product design. People who are designing the product actually are very much having contribution on whether or not we will achieve a sustainable supply chain. Because when you are designing product, you may need to think about what would you do when, for example, the product is already considered to be unusable, when it achieves or it reaches the end of life. Also, when you are designing a product, you also probably recommending what type of materials that you will be using, whether or not those materials are actually available in local sources or you need to import from other countries, because this will affect very much the environmental impact. For example, if it is always possible to source materials from local suppliers, then the environmental impact would always be much lower compared if you are, for example, importing the materials from other countries. And also in the production stage, we are talking about what kind of production technology that we are using. Is it possible actually to buy or to use green production technology, which somehow could be more expensive to invest at the beginning, but in the end, you are producing less emission and also use less energy to operate those machines, for example. So that goes on to the use stage and to the end of life. So when we are talking about sustainability in the context of supply chain, we are not only talking about the production stage. We are not talking about the end of life, but we are integrating the sustainability message to each stage of the product life cycle, starting from the design up to the end of life. So that is actually very much the concern of the sustainable supply chain management. The term sustainable supply chain, if we are looking at the literature, we actually very much I would consider this is still quite new. I remember when in 2005, I was editing a special issue in International Journal of Production Economics. And at that time, we issue a special edition on sustainable supply chain management. At that time, when we were trying to search this term, we only saw a couple of publications that use the term sustainable supply chain. So it was very much new at the time. So it is less than 20 years if we are talking about today. But the development of the research work on sustainable supply chain is actually growing very much. These numbers, I was collecting these numbers a few days ago. I was trying to search the use of sustainable supply chain and two other terms, remanufacturing and reverse logistic, in two major journals that we consider are publishing a lot of works in this area. And these are the numbers that we have. So say, for example, the word sustainable supply chain in these two journals were not actually existent before 2000. And between 2001 and 2005, we only found two articles that use the term sustainable supply chain, and only one in International Journal of Production Economics. That one was actually the call for papers that was published in International Journal of Production Economics that I was one of the three special issue editors at the time. So very much if we are looking at the history of the use of term supply chain management, we consider that the period of 2006 and 2010 was actually the early growth, while between 2011 and 2015 is actually, I think, a massive growth. And in the last 5 years, we show a very big increase in the number of publications. Well, I'm not trying to say that we did an extensive search in the literatures, because I was just focusing on two journals. One was Journal of Cleaner Production, and the other one was International Journal of Production Economics, because I think these two journals publish really a lot of papers addressing sustainable supply chain management. If we compare, for example, with the terms remanufacturing and reverse logistic, I think they is slightly a little bit earlier than the use of the term sustainable supply chain. Because, for example, between 1996 and 2000, we have seen a couple of research publications that use the term remanufacturing and reverse logistic. But I think all of these three terms are actually increasing in a very high rate in the last 15 to 20 years, indicating that the interest on doing research work in the area of sustainable supply chain, and the surrounding idea is actually very much increasing in the last 15 to 20 years. There are a couple of interesting publications. If you look at, for example, the early development in the area of sustainable supply chain and some other terms that are very much related. For example, these are the two articles that I consider to be the early contribution. Like, for example, the works by Guide et al., published in Informed Journal of Applied Analytics in 2000 with the title of Supply Chain Management for Recoverable Manufacturing System. And the second one, published in Computers and Chemical Engineering with the title of Supply Chain Optimization for Continuous Process Industry with Sustainable Consideration. Well, both of these articles did not specifically or explicitly mention the term sustainable supply chain, but I think implicitly what they do or what they publish are actually very much the idea of achieving more sustainable supply chain. All right, so if we look at some of the framework that people publish in the area of reverse logistics, sustainable supply chain, etc., I picked this one with a slight modification. The work published by Agrawal et al., 2015, they actually present a literature review on reverse logistics, where it is very interesting to see that the bottom part here is actually the forward logistic up to the consumer point. And then when the product is actually arriving at the final stage, end of life, then people would draw it out and collection will start there. When you are collecting the used product, you need to do what is called sorting, because the issue is that when you are collecting used product, not all of them are actually usable to further processing like repair, reuse, remanufacturing, and recycle. Then in that case, you need to do a disposal. Even you are talking about disposal, you still need to do what is called proper disposal when we are talking about sustainable supply chain management. I would like to focus a little bit on few aspects. One is on remanufacturing, because I have a few students have been doing research on remanufacturing in the last few years, where remanufacturing, if we look at that framework again, is one possible treatment of the used product, where remanufacturing normally require extensive work, like complete disassembly of the product and replace the few components. And then finally, when you're done, the product is considered to be as good as new. That would differentiate from the repair, because if you are doing repair work, then you don't really need to do complete disassembly, and the result would not be as good as new. But in remanufacturing, by theory, by concept, we know that the result will be as good as new product. So we have students who try to model remanufacturing. So we use a simple diagram, but one of my students were trying to model pricing and channeling issue in remanufacturing product, because obviously when we talk about remanufacturing product, people said that the quality of the product is as good as new, but there is an issue about the pricing. Would the price to be set exactly the same as the new product, because we know that the quality of the product is considered to be as good as new? Or would you try to offer a discount price, because when people know that your product is actually a result of remanufacturing, they would probably tend not to buy remanufacturing product if there is an alternative to buy a totally new product. So we have a couple of publications in this area. If you are interested, you can have a look at the works that we have done. One was pricing decision for new and remanufacturing product in a closed loop supply chain, but we also consider using separate sales channels. And another one is actually addressing the issue of the quality of the used product that we are collecting, because as I mentioned earlier, when you are collecting the used product, the quality of those used product would not be the same from time to time. Sometimes you get a good enough quality, but in other situation, probably the quality is very low, and in that situation, you probably unable to use it for further remanufacturing. If you look further on the publication in the area of remanufacturing, there are a couple of streams that are very much interesting to see and then to develop further. This is not supposed to be extensive classification. So I pick a few interesting categories. One, for example, is the issue of the pricing. As I mentioned earlier, when you are talking about remanufacturing product, there is a decision that you need to make regarding what is your pricing decision. Would the product will be offered at the same price, or you are differentiating the price? Secondly, we may talk about sales channeling, whether you are offering those two products, new and remanufacturing, into exactly the same sales channel, or you are going to differentiate the sales channels. That's number two. Number three is about the quality of the used product that you collected. The quality and the quantity are always uncertain. Unlike if you are sourcing the virgin materials from your suppliers, here I think you have a high level of uncertainty of the quality as well as the quantity. So that's why it is also interesting to address this issue. And one of the publication of my student was actually trying to address the differentiation of the quality and quantity of the collected product from time to time. And then there is another publication and quality grading. And then another issue is on government subsidy or incentive, because it is very sensible actually to say that when you are offering both new and remanufacturing product, if your government is actually attempting to foster more people to use remanufacturing product, then probably it is a good idea for the government to subsidy those remanufacturing product. And there are a couple of publications in this area already, which I think it is very important. Yeah, and then trade in is also another alternative. So you can trade in the used product with the new product as a result of remanufacturing. And then there are some works that also address on the warranty issue. And finally, also on using hybrid manufacturing facilities. When you talk about remanufacturing, the problem is that probably when you don't have enough or sufficient materials from time to time, it would not be sensible to invest in a dedicated remanufacturing facilities, but rather you would consider using the same common facility to do both manufacturing and remanufacturing together, because that in the end would reduce the risk of low facility utilization in your manufacturing facility. That was about remanufacturing. Another work that people already very much doing is about reverse logistics. I think most of you understand that reverse logistics is basically trying to return back the product from the point of consumption back to the point of origin, to the point where you will do something about the defective product, the rejected product by customer, for example, for the purpose of recapturing value or proper disposal. So there are always two options there. If you can do anything about that, you probably try to recapture the value. But if not, because the quality of the used product is too low, then you go for disposal. But again, even if you are talking disposal, you need to do it properly. So that is what reverse logistics. There are a lot of stream of the research that people have done in the area of reverse logistics. There are a very large majority out of this research are actually talking about network design by using, for example, mixed integer programming and other types of modeling. So by far, I think if you are looking at publication in the area of network design related to reverse logistics, you will see a lot of papers in this area. And then in the second category, you will see the integration between forward and reverse logistic. And then there are also people who are trying to do risk analysis on reverse logistic, also information sharing, outsourcing. Why outsourcing is important here? Because not all supply chain are actually having capability in handling reverse logistics. So somehow there are companies who develop this capability, and these companies are offering services to support any supply chain that require services in doing reverse logistics. So that's why outsourcing is something also interesting in the area of reverse logistics. Now, in terms of modeling, because I know that most of you are actually in the area of mathematics or modeling area, I'm not actually trying to go into details into the formula, etc. But there are a lot of opportunities for people who are expert in modeling actually to involve in supply chain sustainability issue. If you look at the publication, a large majority of papers who are published in the journals like Production Economic, European Journal of Operational Research, Computer Operation Research, etc., are actually quantitative types of analysis, developing a kind of models to support decision in the area of supply chain management, sustainable supply chain management. They could be using single objective optimization, multi-objective optimization, like goal programming, for example, game theory, very much used for pricing issue, multi-echelon inventory models, fuzzy optimization approach, and there are also some works that use simulation modeling. So in looking at the contribution to date, I think we are confident to say that the contribution of those people who are trying to develop models, who work on the quantitative side of sustainable supply chain management have been tremendous up to this point, and the number is growing very much rapidly in the last few years. But what are our future aspirations? What we still need to do in the future is that we need actually to make better impacts, because we do research, but those research would be expected to be useful in real life to improve the practice. Yeah, unless we could actually influence the practice to make the world of this world more sustainable, the supply chain more sustainable, then our work are actually of limited value. And I think people are talking about shifting now from shareholder to stakeholder wealth when you are talking about supply chain. I'm very happy actually that people are now talking about not only maximizing profitability, not only reducing costs of your internal supply chain activities, but rather you are also considering how to reduce the emission, how to improve the well-being of people who are involved in your supply chain. Are your suppliers are actually getting enough revenue to build their capability, etc.? So sustainable supply chain may not be enough actually to name those aspirations, but I would rather say that in addition to sustainable supply chain, we also need to think about responsible supply chain, because we actually need those people who work in the area of supply chain are actually paid well. They have a good standard of living, etc. So we need to think about the system, supply chain as a system or even more appropriately, probably we call it as an ecosystem that consists of those multiple parties. You have suppliers working with you. We have people working as your employee. You are employing a truck driver. We are actually charting the capacity in a train. You are bringing your product to distributors and finally to the end customer. All of these parties actually need to be considered. So rather than just minimizing the cost or maximizing the profitability in one stage of this supply chain players, we need rather to maximize the fairness, maximize the well-being of everybody on every party who are involved in the supply chain. So that would be our challenge in the future. How the modeling work will address this challenge in the future would be a big question that we need to address in the future. So I think finally we need to very much refer to what is called sustainable development goals. There are 17 goals that are formulated by the United Nations. And I'm sure that our work in the supply chain management will need to address at least few of the goals that are already stated by the United Nations. I think that's all. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much again. I hope that what I'm presenting here is giving you some aspiration or some ideas of your future works in the area of sustainable supply chain. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for sharing your profound knowledge with us. Thank you so much, sir.
Professor Pujawan very rightly said how to have a effective, sustainable supply chain. And some of the Indian researchers are still working on socially responsible supply chain. And one of the
Yeah.
speaker is also with us, Professor Sivraj Singh. Professor Sana is also working on economically and socially responsible supply chain. So
Yeah.
participants, Professor Pujawan has given us a good hint about not only about the sustainable supply chain, what it is, but he also talked about green supply chain and what one can do in having green environment, and that is what is the need of the time. So thank you, Professor Pujawan.
Thank you.